her phone was there and her purse was there and all her things, and the doors were propped open.
Yeah.
And there was blood on the front doorstep.
It is after dark in Tucson, Arizona, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department has just locked down a street that does not lock down. Camino de Michael is not a street where you see armored vehicles. It is not a street where SWAT teams move in formation past multi-million-dollar homes while residents are turned away from their own driveways. It is a street in the Shadow Hills subdivision of the Catalina foothills, one of the most affluent, most private, most carefully maintained neighborhoods in the entire state of Arizona. The kind of street where the biggest disruption on any given night is a sprinkler system running too long. But tonight is different. Tonight, more than 20 law enforcement vehicles are staged along this street. Tonight, heavily armored units from the Pima County Sheriff's Department are moving with deliberate, focused urgency toward a single address. Tonight, 2 people have been detained, though the Sheriff's Department, when contacted by reporters on the scene, declined to confirm that officially and stated plainly there would be no press statement released before morning. News Nation reporter Jacob Owens was positioned at the corner of Camino de Michael and Placita de Graciela as the operation unfolded, reporting live to anchor Sean Elliott. The law enforcement presence here is unlike anything we have seen in this investigation, Owens reported. We have been watching lines of officers move down Camino de Michael toward one specific property for the past 2 hours. Neighbors were locked out of their own street for over 90 minutes. We are now beginning to see some of them allowed back through, but the activity around that one address has not stopped. Placita de Graciela and Camino de Michael are closed. Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue, the arteries feeding into Shadow Hills from the north and west, have law enforcement positioned at entry points. This is not a perimeter thrown up in haste. This is a deliberate, coordinated tactical operation in a neighborhood that sits less than 15 minutes from the University of Arizona campus in central Tucson. And it is happening because of one case: the Nancy Guthrie investigation. What you need to understand before anything else is this: law enforcement does not return to a neighborhood like Shadow Hills with SWAT assets and armored vehicles because of a hunch. They do not shut down streets in the Catalina foothills because someone made an anonymous phone call they could not verify. They come back like this, with this level of force, this level of coordination, this level of operational commitment, because something was found, something the kidnapper left behind, something small enough to have been overlooked in the chaos of the first response, something that, when followed with the patience and precision that federal investigations demand, led investigators back to this street, back to this neighborhood, back to one specific address on Camino de Michael. The question that has defined this case since February 1st, 2026, is still unanswered. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, has not been found. But tonight, for the first time since this investigation began, the trajectory of this case has shifted. The SWAT team is not here by accident. They followed something, and what they found when they got here may be the most significant development in this investigation since the night Nancy disappeared. Stay with this, because what comes next changes everything you thought you knew about how this crime was planned, executed, and nearly made to disappear. To understand why federal agents are back on Camino de Michael tonight, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the investigation, the beginning of the night. January 31st, 2026. A Saturday evening in Tucson, Arizona. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy Guthrie walked out of her home at 5380 East Camino de Michael, stepped into an Uber, and was driven to a family dinner somewhere in the Tucson metro area. She was 84 years old. She was sharp, independent, and deeply embedded in her community. She had lived in the Catalina foothills long enough that her neighbors knew her rhythms: when she walked, when she drove, when her lights went on, and when they went off. She was dropped back at her home on Camino de Michael at 9:48 p.m. By 9:50 p.m., 120 seconds later, her garage door had closed. She was inside. The neighborhood was dark. No visitors arrived. No car pulled into her driveway. No lights came on in any of the rooms visible from the street. For the next 3 hours and 57 minutes, nothing on the exterior of 5380 East Camino de Michael changed. Then, at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera went offline. Not a technical glitch, not a power fluctuation. It went dark at the precise moment a masked figure appeared at her front door. A figure who arrived not stumbling through opportunistic impulse, but geared, prepared, and ready. Ski mask pulled fully over his face. Latex gloves on both hands. A holstered handgun positioned on his right hip. A 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking backpack secured across his shoulders. Long pants, a dark jacket, every inch of identifying skin covered. The FBI's official description of this individual: male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. That description has not changed. No arrest has followed it. Nancy's blood was confirmed on her front porch. There was no sign of a prolonged struggle beyond that point. What the forensic evidence told investigators was efficient, targeted contact, the kind that does not happen by accident and does not happen without preparation. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. Her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognized journalists in American broadcasting, reporting each morning from Studio 1A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. When news of Nancy's disappearance broke in the early hours of February 1st, it did not stay local. It did not stay in Tucson. It crossed every wire, every network, every platform within hours. The whole country stopped. But a famous name does not solve a crime. And 2 months later, despite more than 13,000 tips submitted to the FBI's tip portal at tips.fbi.gov, and despite a combined reward of $1.1 million, $1 million offered by the Guthrie family and an additional $100,000 posted by the FBI, despite the full investigative resources of the FBI's Phoenix Field Office working alongside the Pima County Sheriff's Department, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. What has been confirmed, publicly and on the record, by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos is that mixed DNA was recovered from inside Nancy's home on Camino de Michael. Genetic material from more than one individual. Material that belongs to neither Nancy nor anyone in her documented inner circle. Sheriff Nanos stated directly, "We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect." He acknowledged openly that the sample presents laboratory challenges. It is mixed, the profiles are difficult to separate, and the complete analysis could require up to 12 months. Investigators have already engaged the science of genetic genealogy, the same methodology that unraveled the identity of the Golden State Killer after more than 4 decades of anonymity, and the same approach that placed Brian Koberger at the scene of the University of Idaho murders in Moscow, Idaho, in November 2022. It is powerful technology. It is patient technology. And it is being applied here, on a mixed DNA sample recovered from the home of an 84-year-old woman who has not been seen since 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has described this abduction publicly and without equivocation as targeted, not random, not opportunistic, targeted, specific to this house, specific to this woman, specific to this street, which means whoever did this knew Nancy Guthrie, knew her home, knew her schedule, knew her routines well enough to arrive at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right gear, with exactly the right timing to take her from her front porch in the dark without a single neighbor seeing or hearing anything at all. That level of knowledge does not come from a single drive-by. It comes from sustained, deliberate, patient observation. And that observation had to happen somewhere, from a location close enough to Nancy's front door to be useful, but concealed enough to avoid detection. Tonight, the SWAT team on Camino de Michael believes they know where that location was. 6 weeks before the FBI returned to Shadow Hills with specific, pointed questions about a property near Nancy Guthrie's home, and 2 women who live on Camino de Michael had already told investigators exactly where to look. That fact matters more than almost anything else. The property in question sits in close proximity to Nancy's home at 5380 East Camino de Michael. It is a rental. And according to multiple independent sources who have spoken to journalists covering this investigation, the people who were living there are gone. Their car disappeared. Their presence evaporated. And neither of the 2 neighbors who flagged this to law enforcement in the first days after Nancy's disappearance has received a satisfactory explanation for when exactly those renters left or why. NewsNation's senior investigative reporter Brian Entin, who has logged more time on the ground in Tucson covering this case than virtually any other journalist in the country, and was the first to report publicly what federal agents were specifically asking about when they returned to Shadow Hills. On March 17, 2026, broadcasting to his audience on his YouTube channel, Brian Entin Investigates, Entin disclosed that the FBI, based on sources he described as law enforcement adjacent, had come back to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood with new specific questions centered on a rental property near Nancy's home on Camino de Michael, a property whose occupants had vacated around the time Nancy disappeared. Entin's precise words: "There's one neighbor that moved out before Nancy disappeared, and they have been asking more questions about that situation." He did not overstate it. He did not claim it was confirmed evidence of criminal involvement. But federal agents were asking specifically about that house, about whoever had lived there, and about the exact timing of their departure. At almost the same moment, Crime Stories investigative reporter Dave Mack went on air with a fundamentally different account. According to Mack's sources, the renters of that same property did not leave before the kidnapping. They left immediately after it. Read those 2 accounts side by side and understand what they represent. These are not 2 journalists offering different interpretations of the same established fact. These are 2 experienced investigative reporters, each with law enforcement sources, describing 2 completely opposite sequences of events. And the difference between those sequences is not minor. It is the entire architecture of what that property may or may not represent in this investigation. And if Brian Entin's sources are correct, if those renters left before February 1st, 2026, then what investigators are looking at is a property that went dark, went empty, went silent during the exact operational window leading up to Nancy's abduction. A property with no occupant to notice unusual activity, no resident to report a car sitting in the driveway at an unusual hour. No human presence to flag someone moving between that property and the street outside Nancy's home at 2 in the morning. In that scenario, the vacant house on Camino de Michael is, in the professional language of retired Pima County SWAT commander Bob Krieger, a pre-operational gift. Unoccupied real estate, positioned 50 feet from a target's front door, available to anyone who understood its value. If Dave Mack's account is accurate, if the renters were present until the night of the abduction and then departed immediately after, the investigative question shifts entirely. People who vacate a rental property in the immediate aftermath of a high-profile kidnapping that occurred within eyeshot of their front window, without prior notice to a property manager, without the normal social signals of a planned move, are doing something that carries, and this is not an accusation, it is the language of investigative pattern recognition, the appearance of exit, deliberate, rapid, coordinated exit. The kind that happens when remaining in a location is no longer operationally or personally viable. The FBI is not treating this as a resolved question. On Brian Entin's framing, they are asking more questions about that situation, is the specific language of an open thread, something still being pulled, something that has not yet reached its end. One of these reporters is right. The FBI knows which one. Now let's bring in the neighbors. Because what makes this thread credible is not just what journalists reported. It is what two women who live on this street reported, independently, without coordination, in the first days after Nancy disappeared, before any journalist had written a word about this property. Neighbor Laura, who lives in Shadow Hills and agreed to speak with Brian Entin on camera in her own neighborhood, described what she personally observed. Her words were straightforward. There aren't that many rentals on here, but there is a rental nearby, and whoever lived there had moved out within a few days of this happening. She had noticed the car was gone. She had reasoned backward from its absence, fixing its disappearance at some point she experienced as being contemporaneous with the abduction. She could not say with certainty whether the car vanished before or after February 1st, but it registered as wrong, not criminal wrong, just wrong enough to pick up a phone. Her words, "I thought it's probably nothing, but I'm going to call and let them know that there was somebody living there, and they're not there anymore." She made that call. In a neighborhood where every car, every contractor, and every daily routine is known, a vehicle that evaporates from a nearby rental property with no moving truck, no farewell, no explanation, is the kind of detail that responsible neighbors do not let slide. And then there is Aldine Meister. Meister has lived in the Catalina foothills for nearly 3 decades. Her home sits on the same stretch of Camino de Michael. She spoke with Brian Entin multiple times during the first weeks of this investigation and raised the vacant rental property without being prompted. Not after seeing a news report, not after a journalist suggested it. She raised it herself in the first days after Nancy disappeared, because it was already sitting wrong with her. Her words to Entin were exact and unambiguous. "The neighbors on the other side of me moved out. I wanted them to check that house." Week 1. Day 1, essentially. Aldine Meister was pointing at that property before the FBI's evidence response team had finished processing Nancy's front porch. 6 weeks later, federal agents returned to Camino de Michael asking precisely the questions Aldine Meister had already asked. But Meister had reported something beyond the vacant property, something that, placed alongside everything that has since emerged, takes on a weight that is difficult to dismiss. In the 2 to 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared, she told Entin, she observed a man moving through Shadow Hills who did not belong there. She could not see his face. He was wearing a hat pulled low over his features, his posture hunched forward in a way that read, to her experienced neighborhood eye, as deliberate concealment. When he was not in walking gear or hiking clothes, the standard uniform of the Catalina foothills resident taking an evening stroll. He was wearing street clothes, moving with purpose through a neighborhood where purposeful strangers do not go unnoticed. Her words delivered on camera without hesitation. I noticed this strange guy with his hat down really low. He was kind of hunched over, not in walking or hiking gear. He was dressed in kind of street clothing. I thought that was weird because that's not normal. Hold that image. Was because former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, one of the most consistently credentialed analytical voices who has spoken publicly about this investigation, has assessed that the masked individual captured on Nancy's doorbell camera was not making his first visit to 5380 East Camino de Michael on the night of February 1st. Coffindaffer has publicly characterized a visit to Nancy's address on January 11th, 2026, 3 weeks before the abduction, as a trial run, a reconnaissance visit, a dry run conducted by someone who was not yet ready to act but was actively preparing to do so. That assessment is Coffindaffer's professional judgment, not a confirmed FBI finding. But the Guthrie family's most recent public statement asked the community explicitly to search their memories for 2 specific dates, January 11th and January 24th at 2026, not a general time frame, not the weeks before Nancy disappeared. Those exact dates. When a family operating in close coordination with federal investigators asks the public to focus on 2 specific evenings, it is because those evenings carry documented investigative significance. Information already in the FBI's possession points to those dates as meaningful. The family is not guessing. They are asking for corroboration of something investigators already have reason to believe occurred. If the man Aldine Meister observed, hat pulled low, hunched, dressed wrong for this neighborhood, was moving through Shadow Hills during that January window, she may have seen the reconnaissance phase of this abduction with her own eyes. She noticed. She documented it. She reported it. And the FBI, 6 weeks after Nancy disappeared, has just came back to ask the questions she had already been trying to get someone to ask. Before this framework means anything, you need to understand who constructed it. Because the difference between credible expert analysis and internet speculation is not the conclusion, it is the biography of the person drawing it. Bob Krieger is a retired commander from the Pima County Sheriff's Department's own SWAT unit, not a neighboring county, not a different state, Pima County. The same jurisdiction, the same terrain, the same residential streets where Nancy Guthrie has lived and where this crime unfolded. He spent the operational years of his career planning and executing high-risk entries, tactical operations, and surveillance-driven missions in environments exactly like Shadow Hills. He has stood on streets like Camino de Michael in the dark. He knows what they sound like at 2 in the morning. He knows what it takes to move through a neighborhood like this without being seen, heard, or remembered. When Bob Krieger looks at the evidence in this case and draws a professional conclusion, he is not theorizing from a distance. He is reading a scene he has navigated himself, in a jurisdiction he spent decades serving. In an initial exclusive interview with Parade magazine, Krieger examined the available forensic and circumstantial evidence, the masked figure on the doorbell camera, the holstered weapon, the gloves, the backpack, the deliberate choice of hour, and arrived at a conclusion he stated without qualification. I do think that this was a very intentional crime. I think it was targeted and specific to this house. He elaborated that the operational planning embedded in what the evidence showed made this look deeply premeditated, and that the suspect, while perhaps not a career criminal with a professional resume, had arrived at 5380 East Camino de Michael with a structured plan and had, in his precise words, remained relatively quiet since the incident. Intentional, targeted, planned. Those were his first 3 words of assessment. In a follow-up exclusive published by Parade magazine on March 19, 2026, Krieger did not simply restate those conclusions, he extended them. Where his initial interview characterized what the suspect did, this second interview characterized where the suspect prepared to do it. He moved from behavioral analysis to infrastructure analysis, and that shift, from describing a plan to describing the physical location where that plan was built, is the shift that changes the entire shape of this investigation. Krieger told Parade that law enforcement investigators should examine the vacant rental property near Nancy's home on Camino de Michael as a possible home base or staging location for the suspect or suspects. Those are his operational words: home base, staging location. These are not rhetorical flourishes. In the vocabulary of tactical law enforcement, they carry specific meaning. A staging location is where an operation is assembled before it moves. It is where equipment is stored between reconnaissance visits. It is where someone returns after each observation run to process what they have learned and adjust what comes next. It is where a person establishes a reason to be present, a cover story in Krieger's precise language that transforms their presence on a residential street from suspicious to invisible. Krieger told Parade directly that staying in a nearby rental property would give someone a cover story to be at those locations at different times. And here, he made a distinction that every investigator and every journalist covering this case should have picked up and amplified immediately. He specified that what he was describing was a cover story, not an alibi. The difference is not semantic. An alibi is backward-facing. It answers the question of where you were after a crime has already occurred. A cover story is forward-facing. It answers the question of why you are here right now, before anything has happened, and in a way that satisfies the curiosity of anyone who might otherwise call someone. In practical terms, a person sitting in a parked car on Camino de Michael at midnight, watching the lights in the window of a house across the way, raises immediate concern in a neighborhood like Shadow Hills. Unless that person lives next door, in which case, no one calls anyone, no one thinks twice. The cover story is the invisibility. Krieger then offered the detail that in the estimation of this analysis is the most operationally significant statement any credentialed expert has made publicly about this case since the FBI released the doorbell camera footage. He told Parade that the vacant property on Camino de Michael, out of, in his words, the prying eye of the neighborhood, could serve as a location to set up surveillance equipment, and that such equipment could be easily stashed in a structure or on the property without anyone knowing. Read that again, slowly. A retired Pima County SWAT commander with nearly 3 decades of experience running surveillance-driven operations in this exact terrain is telling a national publication that in his professional judgment, the property next to Nancy Guthrie's home may have housed physical surveillance infrastructure. Not a person sitting at a window, not someone watching with binoculars from behind a curtain, a device, a camera, a motion-activated sensor, a monitoring system capable of streaming a continuous feed of Nancy's front door, her driveway, her garage, and her daily patterns, to a phone, to a laptop, to anyone, anywhere, while the property itself appeared completely, unremarkably vacant to every neighbor who walked past. He told Parade that such a setup would position someone to observe, in his words, the comings and goings of people, the timing of things, of all the people, including Nancy. The timing of things, including Nancy. From the verified public record, we know the following about Nancy Guthrie's movements on the final evening before her disappearance. She left her home at 5:32 p.m. by Uber, returned at 9:48 p.m., and had her garage door closed by 9:50 p.m. At 1:47 a.m., her doorbell camera went dark. The operational window, the period she was confirmed inside, alone, with no visitors, in a quiet neighborhood, was 3 hours and 57 minutes. If someone had been watching that address from the property next door for any sustained period before that night, they would have known that window existed. They would have known its typical length. They would have known it was reliable. They would have arrived at 1:47 a.m. Not because they got lucky, but because they had already confirmed, through patient observation from 50 feet away, that it was the right moment. Here is what the FBI's evidence response team would be looking for inside a property used as a staging location. And here is why finding it would change this prosecution entirely. This is not speculation. This is the established methodology of forensic investigation as applied to the specific operational framework that Bob Krieger has publicly described. Every person who occupies a space leaves biological material behind. This is not a matter of carelessness. It is biology. Skin cells shed constantly and involuntarily, and depositing onto every surface, contacted with regularity. Hair-carrying follicular cells transfers to upholstery, carpet, and floor surfaces. Saliva leaves traces on door handles, on glass rims, on anything touched in proximity to the mouth. In a property where someone spent even 2 to 3 weeks, the concentration of what forensic scientists classify as touch DNA is not minimal. It is substantial. It accumulates in carpet fibers, in the microscopic grain of wood surfaces, on the edges of window frames, on door handles, and the backs of chairs. The advantage of processing a rental property is structural. The pool of individuals with documented, verifiable, legitimate reason to have been inside that property is small and traceable. The property management company maintains records. Prior tenants can be identified, interviewed, and asked to provide voluntary DNA comparison samples. Their profiles are then eliminated from the forensic picture. What remains, what cannot be explained by any documented occupant, is anomalous biological material from someone who had no documented right to be in that space. Cross-reference that anomalous material against the mixed DNA already confirmed by Sheriff Chris Nanos to have been recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home at 5380 East Camino de Michael, and you have the evidentiary foundation that federal prosecutors describe as cross-scene DNA. 2 separate crime scenes, 2 separate evidence collection processes conducted independently of each other, 2 separate chains of custody maintained according to federal evidentiary standards, and the same unidentified DNA profile appearing in both locations. The legal question that cross-scene DNA forces into a courtroom is not answerable by coincidence. It is not answerable by proximity. The only answer a defense attorney can offer to a jury looking at the same unknown profile recovered from a kidnapping victim's home and from the property next door is the truth. And if the truth is that their client had no legitimate reason to have been in either location, there is no answer at all. That is why the FBI's evidence response team came back to Shadow Hills. That is what they were looking for. And that is why a SWAT team is on Camino de Michael tonight. Beyond biological material, Physical evidence of sustained observation does not disappear cleanly. Our furniture repositioned to optimize a sightline toward a neighboring property leaves compression marks in carpet that professional restoration cannot fully erase. Repeated contact with a specific window sill, a person returning to the same position night after night to observe the same address, leaves scuff patterns in paint and flooring that forensic analysis can recover and document. If surveillance equipment was physically installed in that property and then removed before departure, the removal itself is not invisible. Mounting hardware leaves holes. Adhesive mounts leave residue with a chemically identifiable signature. And cable routing paths, the channels cut or taped along baseboards and window frames to power a device or route its feed, leave physical traces that a trained evidence response team is specifically equipped to locate and document. And storage media, the micro SD cards and removable flash drives that compact surveillance systems use to store recorded footage locally, are small. They are easy to overlook in the urgency of a rapid, unplanned departure from a property that is suddenly too dangerous to remain in. If even one such card was left behind, it could contain weeks of time-stamped, recorded footage of Nancy Guthrie's home from across the street. Brian Enton's reporting adds a second simultaneous investigative thread that most coverage has treated as secondary. It is not secondary. According to Enton, yet at the same time, federal agents were asking specific questions about the vacant rental on Camino de Michael. They were also canvassing Shadow Hills residents for something specific: the individual names, not company names, not general contractor references, individual worker names, of every person who had performed construction or renovation work on properties in the neighborhood in the weeks preceding Nancy's disappearance. A resident told News Nation that a friend of hers, whose home was under active construction nearby, was approached by federal agents and asked to account for every laborer who had set foot on her property. Every single one. Former FBI Special Agent Steve Moore, speaking on Brian Enton's program, provided the analytical context for what this level of investigative granularity means. Retracing steps, Moore clarified, and is not backward motion. It is forward momentum with a specific new target. Something entered the investigation, a name, a detail, a piece of information that cross-referenced against the existing evidence base in a way that pointed somewhere specific. The FBI does not deploy this level of resource to chase dead ends. When they come back to a neighborhood asking for individual names, they are building towards something. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer addressed the overall state of the investigation in late March 2026 with a clarity that deserves direct attention. Her words, "Just because we don't see what the FBI is investigating, I assure you they are drinking from a fire hose with more investigative leads than most cases ever have." That is not optimism. So that is the assessment of a former federal agent who understands exactly how these investigations function from the inside. Red hot behind the scenes, across every investigative category, every thread being pulled, every name being cross-referenced, every piece of biological material being processed against the unknown profile sitting in a Pima County forensic database. When Newsweek contacted the FBI's Phoenix field office directly for comment on the vacant property and the construction worker investigation, the written response was this: "We typically don't respond or reply to independent reporting. Additionally, as a DOJ rule, we don't comment on ongoing investigations." Notice what that statement does not say. It does not say the property was investigated and cleared. It does not say the construction worker inquiry yielded nothing of investigative value. It does not say the vacant rental has been eliminated as a location of interest. It says nothing. In an investigation where the FBI has made deliberate, strategic choices to release specific information to the public. The doorbell camera footage, the blood evidence confirmation, the DNA disclosure, the targeted kidnapping designation, the deliberate choice to say nothing about one specific property is not a bureaucratic reflex. It is a choice. And in this investigation, every choice the FBI makes means something. Before we continue, here is where the line sits between what is established fact and what is credible, sourced, expert-attributed reporting that has not yet been officially confirmed by law enforcement. You deserve to know the difference. Yet every time. What is confirmed on the public record? Nancy Guthrie, age 84, was reported missing on February 1st, 2026, from her home at 5380 East Camino de Michael, Tucson, Arizona. Her blood was forensically confirmed on her front porch. Her doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m. A masked suspect, carrying a holstered handgun and a 25-liter hiking backpack, appeared on that camera in the moments before it went dark. The FBI has officially described this individual as male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. Mixed DNA of unknown origin was recovered from inside her home and confirmed publicly by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. Sheriff Nanos has described this abduction on the record as targeted. The Guthrie family has posted a reward of $1 million. The FBI has added $100,000. More than 13,000 tips have been submitted. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. What is reported by credentialed journalists and named experts, but not yet officially confirmed by the FBI. The FBI's specific renewed investigative focus on the vacant rental property near Nancy's home on Camino de Michael, reported by NewsNation's senior investigative reporter Brian Entin through law enforcement adjacent sources. The simultaneous construction worker name-by-name investigation, also reported by Entin. The directly contradictory accounts of when the renters vacated that property, as reported independently by Entin and Crime Stories reporter Dave Mack, which remain unresolved in public reporting. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger's professional framework characterizing that property as a possible staging location and home base. His expert assessment, published by Parade magazine, not an official law enforcement finding. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer's characterization of the January 11th visit to Nancy's address as a trial run. Her professional judgment, not a confirmed FBI conclusion. The accomplice theory, advanced by retired detective Kurt Daub, based on publicly available evidence. His professional opinion, not a confirmed investigative finding. Every source named. Every claim attributed. Every distinction drawn. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She was taken from her home on Camino de Michael in the middle of the night, in her pajamas, without her shoes, and without the daily medication her health depends on. She did not go willingly. She did not go quietly. She went because someone planned this, prepared for this, and executed it with a level of operational precision that required surveillance, preparation, and a base of operations close enough to her front door to be useful. The SWAT team that moved down Camino de Michael tonight did not arrive by coincidence. They followed a trace, something the kidnapper left, something in a property that 2 neighbors flagged in week 1. Something that a retired Pima County SWAT commander publicly described as a staging ground, something that federal agents returned to with specific questions 6 weeks into one of the highest profile missing persons investigations in the country. The car is gone. The house sits empty. But empty does not mean clean. And the FBI's evidence response team knows the difference between a property that was vacated and a property that was wiped. If you were anywhere in the Catalina foothills, near Shadow Hills, near Camino de Michael, near the intersection of Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue, between January 11th and February 1st, 2026, and something registered as wrong, a vehicle that appeared and then disappeared, a face that did not fit the neighborhood, a light in a window of a house that should have been dark, a pattern that broke and then reset. The FBI wants to hear from you directly. Tip line 1-800-CALL-FBI online, tips.fbi.gov. Savannah Guthrie has said publicly that her family is in agony. That word, agony, is not a media word. It is not a press statement word. It is the word a daughter reaches for when language stops being adequate and the only thing left is the truth of what she is living inside every single day, that her mother is not found. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Whoever took her left something behind on Camino de Michael. The FBI found it. Tonight, they followed it back to a street in Shadow Hills, and they are not leaving until they know exactly what happened inside that house. We are not stopping either. Not until there are answers. Not until Nancy comes home. Share this. The wider this reaches, the harder it becomes for whoever did this to disappear. Someone in that neighborhood saw something. Someone always does.